This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer?
Experts in the Wire, episode 124. Dave Smart. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 124 of Experts in the Wire. Today's guest is Dave Smart. Dave, how are you today?
I'm very good, thanks, Dan.
Awesome. So we have a lot to talk about, including JavaScript SEO, web workers, your work with Google as a product expert, some questions from Twitter, and a lot more. But first, I wanted to begin with your background. And I was reading an interview that you did a few years ago, and I read that before you were doing tech SEO and development work, you used to develop ceramics for jet plane engines. And that just piqued my curiosity. So just real quick, what was that all about? And then how did you make the leap from something like that into SEO and development?
Really, it was my first job out of school. I went there. I did a uni course while I was working there in this lab in the aerospace industries and materials. It was very interesting stuff, and got to work with some very clever people. It's like while I was there, that's where I really got into computers. Obviously, creating data reports and things, and how do we share this across the departments and let people have access to it. And that's kind of where I got a bit more into the web and the development part of it. And it has to be said, my interest waned a little in the industry in doing the material science, and there was a lot of layoffs at the time. It's an industry that's huge amounts of money, but very thin margins. So there was a round of layoffs. So I left and went into doing web design and development from there.
And was that like really around the late 90s or so, early 2000s?
Yeah. It was about 95, 96, somewhere around there.
Yep.
So from there, sort of went off into, doing a bit more development stuff, and, sort of did a few sort of summer jobs and things like that, went packing chocolates and things like that just to pay the bills while I learned my trade a bit more, and then started doing web development from there on. And from there, that's where people started taking notice of things of like, well, where do I get traffic from? Back in those days, it was things like Yahoo and Alta Vista and things like that. And then this Google beast came along, and people got sort of interested on how they got doing that. And that's kind of how I got pulled into that side of it too,
Right. So your day-to-day now is you do mostly tech SEO, right? A little bit of development.
Yeah, kind of. Well, it depends on the week, but about 50-50. I like to split the time because I think it's, for me personally, it's important to sort of keep abreast of doing both. And the way I do that, the best way I learn best is by doing. So, it's handy to be able to talk to dev teams if you've got a technical SEO and have at least some concept of what they're going through, in developing something. I don't think it's for everybody, doesn't need to do that. But for me, I find that a big bonus.
Fantastic. So I wanted to just kind of dive headfirst right into our first topic, which is JavaScript SEO. I know this is something you work quite a bit with. I'm wondering if we can begin with your take on sort of the current state of JavaScript in SEO. Like, how good is Google now? In the past, I used to get very freaked out when I saw a website built on a JavaScript framework or the content was not rendering in the HTML on the server side. Are we beyond the point of worrying about content being rendered in JavaScript? Like, how good is Google now with handling JavaScript sites?
Yeah, I think it's taken leaps and bounds. The real tipping point was when it switched to using Evergreen Chrome a couple of years back. That was a huge point because the biggest problem before, it was frozen on a very old version of the browser, of the Chromium browser.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of features and a lot of things didn't quite work and, wouldn't work as expected. Whereas a developer would, look at my shiny, wonderful site, works brilliantly for the user. But then this Google bot thing will come along and go, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
So it was a huge change once they changed to the Evergreen version, which basically means that it runs a version of Chrome, pretty much the same version as is current and out there.
Yeah.
So the feature set and the way it works are mostly the same. It made a huge difference. And for 99% of the time, or maybe 90% of the time, it just works, But But there are always special considerations. You're adding a layer of complexity or a layer of fragility that isn't necessarily Google working with JavaScript's fault. It's kind of just how these things work. But for mostly, it just works. And SEO is roughly the same. There's a lot less reduced need for things like pre-rendering and all these things. And
wasn't there also something when they sped up the time that it took for them to render it or cache it or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, the way it works, Googlebot will come along and it'll grab the initial HTML of your page, and then it'll pass it through the web rendering service, as they call it, which is basically the bit where they do all the clever stuff with JavaScript. Basically, that is a headless version of Chrome. And it got ground to being, and I think a lot of it was kind of a myth, although there is a queue there, but it's not necessarily a myth, more thing that there is this long delay. And it got to, people talking about weeks and, your page will only get partially indexed, and then weeks later. And I think it was slower in the past, certainly. But I think that, it was more a way that it was explained that there is this process. And I think people jumped on it and maybe misunderstood how long that delay is.
Yeah.
But it definitely has got quicker. I mean, Martin Splitt, obviously, who is the JavaScript guy from Google.
Yep.
He was saying the median time is really just a few seconds.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now for it to pass with the web rendering service. And, it's not going to be a case of that you're waiting around forever. And I think an important thing that people don't realize is that it's not really just a purely JavaScript thing. Every page ultimately is rendered,
right,
more or less, because they need to understand, how does this page go together? Is it mobile friendly? Is it going to get full of ads and stuff? So it's not, that rendering process and queue isn't purely a JavaScript thing. Obviously, it's hyper important if all your content is in that JavaScript, more so maybe than otherwise. But it's definitely, not the case of where you'll be waiting around ages, and hasn't been for a while, I think.
Yeah. And how do you go about testing JavaScript potential issues? There's certain tools that you like to use, or I know I go right into Chrome and use DevTools in some particular ways.
Yeah,
so what are your favorite ways to test?
Yeah, I mean, Chrome, the DevTools in Chrome are brilliant. If you open them up, have a look at the Elements panel, you can get an idea of what Google might roughly see. There's always some caveats with that. You can do some interesting things, like you can change the user agent to Google's and see, particularly if you've got a site that's pre-rendering, sometimes that gets out of sync. So those are great things to do locally while you're testing. But the actual testing tools that you get from Google themselves are really handy. Yeah. So you've got URL inspection tool in Search Console, which is brilliant if you're looking at stuff that's already out there and being indexed, because you can look what they've actually seen. Your rendered HTML is there. It's the final arbiter. It's what they saw.
So is that the closest to like seeing what Google sees, the URL inspector?
Yeah, it is, certainly in terms of what they have seen. So obviously the problem on the first step of that is that, what has gone on. So when you're doing fixes, then they've got the live test functionality there. And then there's also the mobile friendly testing tool and the rich results testing tool. Yeah. All three of those are fundamentally the same. When you're doing a live test, basically that's going and fetching it as it is now. Right. And once again, you'll get a screenshot, which is great because we're visual, we're human, we're not browsers. So that's great to have a quick look at what things look like.
Yeah, is that screenshot fairly accurate to what Google actually, like, quote unquote, sees? I know some people have said different things in the past.
Yeah, because Google doesn't ever, when it's indexing, when it's looking, it doesn't paint something. So really, it's a human interpretation of something. Okay. It's handy for that because it's really great and easy to see if something's missing totally. Yeah. The big problem with the screenshots, certainly for the URL inspector and for the mobile friendly testing tools, is that it doesn't sort of show you much of the page. It only shows you the top part. Right. So often that's enough to kind of get an idea. The desktop, if you go into rich results, you can choose a user agent and you can do desktop. That does scroll a little bit more. Obviously, that has implications if your site's doing something different from mobile to desktop. Yeah. Probably less popular than it used to. But that gives you a bit of a better picture. The other thing as well, doing the desktop version in rich results does that none of the others do is it fires into section observers. So basically, when you scroll down a page, you might have something kind of like lazy loading. Basically, you've got something that lazy loads an image when the viewport gets close enough. The other two, the mobile smartphone resolution testing tools, don't do that. They don't expand the viewport in the same way.
Right.
So you never see all that stuff. And so you can miss something when you're doing the live testing there. So if you're relying on things like that, so you might be confused as to why something isn't in your rendered HTML from those testing tools, but it is when it's indexed. And that's very often because of that. So it's worth if you're testing anything.
So those are all great, like one-page snapshots, which I love all those. Yeah. What about for crawling, right? So like, I know Google, as you said, Googlebot's better at rendering content in JavaScript, but how do you test crawling? And there could be issues when there's something like maybe your main menu is in JavaScript or things like that.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, some tools like really useful. Screaming Frog is brilliant for that. You can turn on JavaScript rendering and you can just see if the links are turning up, basically, and if it's crawling through. Many things you've got, a lot of the big tools, things like deep crawl and that kind of stuff have JavaScript rendering functionality. And while they'll never be exactly the same as what Google does, they're close enough to give you a good idea that, hey, look, an href is turning up and from one page it's found this other one and it can go and find it. Obviously making sure you turn off things like sitemaps and stuff helps there. Just making sure you're focusing that this is a crawlable page and it has crawlable paths.
Yep.
Is really helpful there.
So one question from Twitter, which I'm going to ask in the JavaScript part here from Lyndon was, is there a most common JavaScript error that you tend to see on sites?
Honestly, the most common one is that they block it with robots.txt.
Oh, really? They block the JavaScript files.
They block JavaScript files. They'll block API calls that the JavaScript might make because they go, well, that's not part of my page. I don't want Google wasting time, but it needs to crawl it.
Yeah.
Because one of the ways it works very differently to your browser, you load something in the browser, it goes and fetches everything. You've got the network layer that does that. With Google, because of the scale they work, they don't really have that. They have the crawl queue. So it'll fetch something and then it will queue those resources to go and fetch them somewhat independently in a way. So if you're blocking something from that aspect, it will come and just go, I'm not allowed to go in there. No, sorry. And your page fails.
Right.
And, you see it with CSS too. Why is my page not mobile friendly? Well, you don't let Google see the CSS, so it doesn't know how to lay it out,
That's right. So what are the best ways to handle a site built on like a JavaScript framework nowadays? In the past, I know, like you said, it might have been dynamic rendering or things like that. I mean, is that not even a concern at this point? Or, if there is a concern, how do you go about addressing them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're at a place where everybody, absolutely all over the world, can drop the dynamic rendering because there's still some more frameworks chugging away out there. But the first part of call is always have a look what's being indexed. Look out for things like pages that are randomly getting software forward or maybe duplicate to another thing where it makes no sense. Make sure your content's actually there. And the ultimate arbiter is just search for it. Search for some unique thing.
Put it in quotes or something and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because if it's working, then really you've not got a problem. But as frameworks have grown, particularly the rise in things that are more server-side rendered, it's kind of one of those funny things. Those have grown, as has Google's ability to do client-side stuff a little bit better, maybe.
Right.
It's kind of shifted away. We've got things like Next.js, which is for React's version of server-side render. We've got Nuxt, which is for Vue, and SvelteKit. We've got endless nameless ones, and server-side rendering is really good. In some ways, that solves all of the problems of pre-rendering and dynamic pre-rendering, because while that's probably quite easy to get something like Rendertron, stick that in front, it's a quick fix. Devs can probably knock that out in a day or two. You're running two systems. There's always potential that one will get out of sync with the other. You don't really understand what's going on there, maybe.
Right.
So once it gets passed down the line. So it's better to have a solution that works for both people. That is both user land, it's both me as a visitor and Googlebot itself. and when you're sending the main content, certainly server-side rendering something and then just enhancing that from there on, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds in some respects. It can help with performance, certainly, because your browser has to download everything, then put it all together, then display something. At least there's something there from the beginning. And then you can hydrate into the more JavaScript, SPA, single page application kind of thing, and get those benefits.
And what does hydrate mean? Hydrate, what is that?
So hydrate. So you've got a page of HTML comes through, and then you need to make that interactive. You need the JavaScript to take it over. So basically, that process is basically called hydrating. So it'll take the document, put my teeth back in, the document object model, and get all the interactivity. It'll get all the classes, and then it will take over from there. So when you click on the next, it behaves like an SPA. So it adds all the interactivity. We're beginning to get to a place where we're even beginning to move beyond that into resumability, but because basically that can be, once again, kind of an expensive process because you've got your content, then all the JavaScript's running to basically show you the same thing.
Right.
So, it has its benefits, but there's also, if something's not that interactive, then it's a lot of wasted power and stuff. Probably not so much from an SEO factor because Google probably won't care that much, but you're verging on things like, your core web vitals. You can impact things like LCP can sometimes be affected because you're rehydrating and reshowing an image and things like that. And so they are moving on to whereby it's just little islands of interactivity, or they tend to call it resumability, but we're not really quite stable there with the frameworks that are doing those tricks just yet. They're heading there though, but there's Quick, there's Marco, which is eBay's JavaScript framework. Their next version's heading that way. So I think that will be the next shift to that. And at that point, really, it kind of, we're back to they're just pages. So
right. In your slides from Brighton SEO, which you spoke at, slide 24, you mentioned caching, and you said in the slides, Google caches aggressively. So what does that mean in relation to JavaScript?
For JavaScript sites, particularly things that are doing things client side, there's a lot more implications there. I mean, obviously Google's at the scale they crawl the web is huge, it's immense. So that's why they cache things really hyper aggressively sometimes.
And that's to save them from having to keep refetching that page over and over.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And it's benefit for both because, if they're fetching whatever JavaScript file and they've got that, they don't need to go and fetch it. It means they're available to look at a lot more of your site. It's not eating crawl budget or things off your site. It's also it's resource safe for you as well.
Right. And do we know how long they're cached? Are they as long as they can possibly get away with?
As long as they think it's valid. Yeah. Okay. There's no sort of fixed thing, and they'll learn and they'll see and they'll change. But yeah, basically they'll hold on to it as much as they can.
And then you mentioned something called a cache control header. What is that exactly?
Well, when there's something responds, it can be a web page or it could be one of the resources, and a web server sends back. You can set a cache control header. You can tell a browser what to do with this. Never cache it, which means each time I see that request, I've got to go and fetch it again. Or you can say, I want you to cache it for so long and things like that.
Okay.
Brilliant for browser, and you should cache your resources for browser. However, because Google doesn't work in the same way, it's not doing the same thing. It very often completely ignores those. Mm-hmm. There are other ones there you can have if last modified and if modified since. So you can say, this file was published on so-and-so in this version, and it's not changed. So when Google or a browser comes back, you will send it a 304 response, which basically says, you don't need it again. You've already got it. It's fine.
Okay.
They do tend to take some attention of those. E-tag and non-if matched are the same thing, just in a slightly different way. Basically, you give this a serial number, more or less, the server, and they go, oh yeah, is it still that? Yep, still that. And it just saves some crawling.
Okay.
They do tend to take some attention of that. You will find that when you first put that on, that it might take some while for them to trust you, that's actually right. But in terms of the cache header and expires and stuff, they pretty much tend to ignore it, particularly for resources, and they'll just cache as they feel fit.
And you mentioned something about caching the API crawl.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd never heard of that.
Yes.
So what does that mean exactly?
So it's the same thing. So if you consider you've got an SPA, a typical client site, you'll load a framework, which is just very simply almost a blank HTML page. Then you'll run some JavaScript and you'll say, please go to this API, /API/cats are great. Go and pull me information about my cats. And you'll get a response, and then the JavaScript will take that response and it will turn it into HTML. You've written some functions, it will put it on the page so people can see it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a resource. It's fetching it just like it can CSS, just like it can a JavaScript file. And it can hold, but like the JavaScript, it can hold on to that. It can aggressively cache it. So, as I say, particularly with a JavaScript file, if it means you've rebuilt your site and you've changed everything, or you've changed a little bit, and it's working off old JavaScript that it's got cached, then things can go wrong.
Right.
On the API, it can mean that if freshness is really important to you, to whatever that data that's coming back is really important, it might visit your page, it might visit the URL, but it goes, oh, we already have the response for that API, so old data. So it can be a bit of an issue for that too.
And you mentioned something called fingerprinting a file. That was something I'm also, I'm a hacky developer at best, right? Like years ago when I first got into this. So that was something I had not come across before either. So what is fingerprinting a file? What does that mean?
Okay. So say like you've got app.js is your application.js. It's the JavaScript file that it goes and fetches, and that's called the logic to go and make calls and everything. And you changed it, and it'll go, no, we know that there's an app.js, so I'll fetch it again. We'll just use it, and that's where you can get out of sync. So if you fingerprint the file, basically it just means put in some kind of version in it. So rather than app.js, you'd have app.bunch of numbers, some words, some whatever .js. So the file name becomes different. That's all it is. There's kind of no mystery. It's basically versioning. What those numbers are doesn't really matter, just as long as it's different. I mean, you can almost do it with a query string afterwards as well. So you'll see that particularly WordPress tends to do that a lot. When you have a look, you'll see the CSS is CSS and then question mark V equals.
Oh, that's what that is.
Point whatever. Which fundamentally does do the same job, but you will find that versioning things like that can have some implications on CDNs, things like Cloudflare and things like that will normalize the file name. So it will be caching things. So if you're fingerprinting that way for Google, it'll probably be fine. It'll work, but you might still have issues somewhere intermediate down the line. So it's usually better just to change that file name itself.
Okay.
That can be tricky. Obviously, for an API call, it can be very tricky to do that. For your file names, it's brilliant. And particularly with modern things, if you're building something in a JavaScript framework, you'll have a build step. Nearly all of those have some fashion of being able to configure, please fingerprint my file names. So every time you publish a new version of the app to go up, these are automatically done.
I see.
I mean, obviously, sometimes you can get into a situation if you're constantly rebuilding and you're doing it a lot, then it can sometimes just pay just to leave the old versions on for a week at tops, I'll say, just in case Google does come back, looks for that specific file. It's not just erroring it out. It doesn't tend to be that much of a problem, but just belts and braces.
So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but for the API crawl, you're always hitting the same point. You're always, you can't really fingerprint it in the same way efficiently. Well, I suppose you could change file name somewhere, but most of you are not going to. So if you've got something that's really important, that freshness is important, then you can do post requests instead. So normally there's different kinds of things. You can request something with a get. So like you type in http example.com in your browser, it's doing a get request. Just go, please give me the information at this address. If you do a post request, traditionally that's more if you're sending information and then getting a response back. But you don't necessarily have to send it anything meaningful. But if you do a post request and it comes back, it's not cached. It's never cached. Post requests aren't cached in the browser, and post requests aren't cached by Google. So that's one way you can to do it. But I would urge caution to make sure that's what you actually want to do.
Okay.
It's because sometimes people jump, oh no, I might get over. Does it matter if it's not changing? If it's not changing now and things like recommended products, for example, that might be an API call. Does it matter if it's a little bit out of date? Probably not. It's probably better to save your crawl budget and save everybody's time and just let it cache. Is it a list of latest breaking news that's popping through every few minutes? Then yeah, you'll probably want to make sure that's the latest, greatest version.
Right. So it really depends upon the content. One last question about the JavaScript stuff. So Jess Peck, who's also been on this podcast, I'll link to her show in the show notes. We talked about image SEO. She wanted to know, what is your favorite JavaScript framework and then your least favorite JavaScript framework?
Oh, right. They're all pretty good in different ways, but most of them are. I'm a big fan of Svelte. I like Svelte, and particularly the latest one they're doing called SvelteKit.
Okay.
Which is really handy. It does a lot of the SSR, the server-side rendering stuff out of the box rather painlessly. It doesn't get in the way. For me as a developer, I find it doesn't get in the way as much as some of the other frameworks do. And one of the big things that I like about it is it doesn't have this virtual DOM thing like React and Vue have, which is basically another whole copy of the site. It's working in memory, then copying it back onto your screen, which does have its benefits in some cases. Some things that's the right choice, but for most things, I find it's usually not. So it tends to be a bit leaner, a bit meaner. The one downside is it is still technically in beta. Well, SvelteKit is still technically in beta, and it's developing rapidly. So there's the odd breaking change that comes along. So if you're going to build something big and complex in it, be prepared for that you might need to make some changes, but it's rapidly approaching maturity. Least favorite, probably the original Angular JS. It's end of life now, so it should really be dead and gone.
Yeah.
But it's still out there and still causing troubles.
Yeah. That's the one that I remember years ago when I would come across a site built on Angular that would give me a massive headache. So I want to talk just briefly about web workers. You have a really great article on your blog called tamethebots.com, which I'll link to that and all the posts and everything. But the article is titled Web Worker Content, Will It Index? And I thought it was an interesting question and article. But first of all, for anybody that might not be familiar, what is a web worker?
Okay, so browsers work on threads, basically. So you have the main thread, which is where everything's happening. It's where all the document model is getting put together. So basically where the HTML is turned into a document model, turned into pixels on your screen that you can see. It's where everything happens mostly. So if you've got a very heavy function, something that's, processing a ton of data or, real crunching stuff, and you're running that, it's blocking everything else up. It's maybe it's making it scroll really badly, or you'll click on something and nothing will happen. And it's that kind of thing. So what a web worker can do is it can take it off that main thread and run it in its own thread. Okay. So basically it's kind of like almost, I suppose, another window in the background. Maybe not quite the way you think about it, but you're saying, you're passing a whole load of data or information. You go, please go and sort that out. Let me know when you've done it, and we'll deal with it. So basically, you pass some data, it does its thing, it passes the data back that's been processed. Then you can display that or whatever you need to do with that. Really helpful, really handy for doing a lot of things.
And so, but your article is the questions about will it index. So does this pose maybe a challenge because it's not part of that main thread? Yeah,
exactly. Because you're passing stuff backwards and forwards, and it's a weird sort of concept of time that Google has when things are running. So it's not always waiting to hear back from the web worker like you'd expect. And so if you've got something that's important for your content that you want to rank for, that's off processing, then coming back and display, for users, that might make a lot of sense. For Google, it might never see that. So it's kind of one of those things that's kind of a bit off the beaten path. It's not that web workers purely don't work, because that'd be easy to sniff for. You could go, oh, do you work with web workers? Google, yes, I do. And in some circumstances, it can, but it particularly works for things that are very, very short. So you're sending something off to the web worker, it's returning very quickly a bit of data, which is great, but that's probably not why you're using a web worker. So, unfortunately for Google, it's not so great for some of the things. And particularly if what's happening in that web worker is going off to fetch something, it's doing a call to an API, that seems to almost always fail, unfortunately. So
if I'm just auditing a site or working on a site as an SEO, outside SEO, how would I know that a site is using a web worker? Is there a way to actually tell, or would I need to ask somebody?
you really, it's probably something you need to ask somebody.
Okay.
You need to talk to the dev team. I mean, obviously, when you get into things like that and you begin to get off the beaten path into things like web workers and there's service workers, which sound like the same thing, but aren't quite the same thing, things like that, it's often useful to, and you've got some content that's missing, sit down with your friendly local dev and ask them, well, what's the path? What's the journey from when I request this page to that data appearing on the page?
Yeah.
And just talk it through step by step. And quite often that's where you'll find out, oh, well, yeah, we're doing this through this way and all this kind of stuff. So then you get a bit of a path that you can follow through and find out where the fail points are. But yeah, very much your dev will know, yes, this is a web worker. But yeah, there's no real particular sort of little flag that will come and go, oh, this is going to a web worker. That's easy to spot.
Did your test result in a definitive answer? Does web worker content index? Does it not index? What did you find in your testing?
I found that it can, but in every way that's meaningful at the minute, it doesn't. So
okay.
That would be my advice for somebody. If it was something that you relied on and that was important to your page, don't trust a web worker to do that. At that point, you would have to pass it off to an API call, let it do something on the server, send it back that way if it was super hyper important data. And it's best left maybe to things that are more interactive, because Google will never interact with your page anyway. So maybe you're sifting some data or you went to something and it's going off to calculate something. Perfect use case for it, because that Google's not going to be doing that anyway. So,
and just a little segue. So the part about, or sidestep, should I say, the part about Google never interacting with the page. You know, I've heard things like this. So one thing I hear is that Googlebot will not click on something to open it, right, and see what's in there.
Correct.
But on the other hand, I remember an episode years ago, I was talking to somebody about, maybe it was Marshall Simmons, we were talking about crawling and how Googlebot would actually fill out forms and try to crawl them. So when we're saying that Google's not going to be clicking around or, you know, interacting with the page, can we break that apart a little bit? Like what things maybe would they interact with or not?
Okay. I think basically you can reliably, in terms of what would reliably work, is an Ahref, and that's it.
Okay.
There is some element that, you know, in the past, particularly if government sites used to be so shoddy, you know, and sort of government, you know, terrible navigation and fill in this form to go and get to this page and this kind of stuff, that they could indeed, you know, fill out a form and press submit maybe, or at least see where the form action would go.
Okay.
So it's not really interactive in terms of they've actually, like you and I would go and type in form, but you've got a form that's got an action, which is like a URL, and they can say, well, these are the fields, let's put something in, see what happens. I think that's less and less happening. There's kind of, on the other hand of that, we've got this whole kind of new Duo thing and this, you know, that kind of thing where Google are beginning to do something a little bit different there, where they'll be going through and, you know, trying to place orders in your restaurant for you and all this kind of stuff. But that's kind of a bit out there and a bit beyond sort of standard stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not going to click a button. It's not going to say, oh, this div with the on-click event. Oh, what happens if we on-click it? Because that gets really expensive, just clicking just to see what happens.
Right. I think a lot of people don't really think about the financial aspects of Google and crawling when they're thinking about SEO and how that might relate to things like so-called crawl budget or whatever that might be.
Exactly. Yeah. Because things might be pence or cents, you know, and it doesn't seem a lot to us, but on the scale that they're doing things, you know, ultimately they'll only make so much money per search, I guess, and you're clicking, you know, the most amount of the ads, but that soon gets chipped down if they're spending a huge amount, you know, even adding a couple of cents to how much it costs to crawl a page is a huge dramatic change.
Yep.
And, you know, and while I'm sure there's some heuristics that they could do to try and go, well, look, we'll only click on things that got this, you know, we've got an on-click event on, well, then there's all the other things that are using listener events that maybe don't have a clear thing in the HTML. So it gets really tricky really quickly. And if you've ever tried to build some kind of test suite that clicks on things while you make sure your site works, you'll soon see what a complex thing it can actually very quickly get. And that you could probably cause more harm than good doing it in some ways, just clicking on filling things. Suddenly somebody's e-commerce site is full of orders, or the database is full of 1,000 empty, abandoned shopping carts, and it's trying to email somebody who doesn't exist about, come back, here's your 5% off, or, so, so I think it is very much only rely on what's in href. Do be prepared that they will also parse anything that looks like a URL and give it a speculative crawl sometimes. So like where you've got something that looks like a URL that's in your JavaScript. So maybe you've got a function that calls, Ajax, and then in there, it's there because that's in the HTML. I go, oh, that looks like a URL. Let's go and have a look what that is. So it's not also entirely safe to just assume just because it's in a JavaScript function, it'll never get crawled. But it's not doing it from clicking the button. It's doing it because it's extracting what looks like a URL out of the HTML, basically.
So let's talk about some more tech SEO stuff. Here's where we have some questions from Twitter. Another one from Lyndon, and he wants to know, how do you define tech SEO?
Oh, that's a kind of a tricky one, isn't it? I think tech SEO is basically anything that's involved with getting a site, the ability for Google to find a site, to access the site, to understand the content of the site and ultimately index it and find its way around. So that's a lot of stuff can fall under there. But it's kind of anything that's not really the marketing and the product aspect of it, in terms of, what the content is on there and the product you're selling and things like that. Mm-hmm. I think it's more that's kind of what it stands for me. I'm sure everybody's blurred the lines between what's tech and what's not. It's like internal linking. Is that content? Is that technical? I'd say it's more technical, and then also verges into the content. And I don't think it's always that useful to clearly define the two. There's got to be some crossover between it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, is where's the value in defining that? Maybe in a job description or as a consultant when I'm scoping something out. But beyond that, as a philosophical discussion, it's certainly, there's a lot of gray areas.
Yeah, definitely.
So another question again comes from Jess Peck, who is on the podcast, as I mentioned. She wants to know, what's the strangest tech SEO problem that you've encountered? I can tell you one if you want a minute to think, but
go for it.
So there was a counter on an e-commerce site that I was working with where they had a category page that would just not index. We tried literally everything. And then one day it occurred to me that their category ID was 404, which was in the URL. Right. Yeah. And so I said, I think maybe having 404 in the URL might be sending a accidental signal to Google that this page is not found. We updated the category ID, re-indexed the page, or redirected the page. It indexed in an hour.
Hey presto.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can, soft 404 detection can sometimes be a little heavy-handed, I find.
So is that what's going on? It's a soft 404 detection.
Yeah, basically. You'll see it a lot as well, where pages are describing, particularly tech docs and stuff, like a page that's describing what a 404 error is or what an error is.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And, it'll just have a message say, what's this code? And it'll go, this error, this page does not work, or this is not working. And go, it doesn't work. Great, brilliant, fine, leave you alone.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, interesting. So, does a strange tech SEO problem occur to you that you've encountered?
One of the weirdest ones I think that I've seen recently was very historic. It was a site, and loads of the pages were suddenly coming back as a duplicated alternative page. The canonical's not right. Duplicate submitted URL not canonical in Search Console. Loads and loads of different pages. They were kind of like a seller, a marketplace seller kind of thing for certain specific things. And it was really weird because they were very random. The pages were clearly not alike. And it was like, this is all the homepage, or this is it. I'm like, well, how is that the homepage? As it turned out, what they were doing is they were making a call, and this is kind of a JavaScript thing, and it was this kind of way of rendering. It's very freaky. They were making a call to an authentication API. And when they were doing that, they were adding a timestamp. So you go visit, bot goes, visits, whatever, it'll go, right, it's so-and-so. Go and check on this auth API, no matter what, whether you were logged in or not. And it just goes, oh yeah, fine, welcome, here's the session, whatever. No, you're not logged in, whatever. However, what they didn't count on is when Google render things, time isn't time, as they do it. So it's one of the weird things that they have in there. When Google render a page through the web rendering service, it almost always starts at midnight. So no matter what time of day they go and render it, the timestamp that you get out of JavaScript is basically starts at midnight when they start rendering the page. So that means that when it was coming along at 3 p.m, they were making this call that included the time that Google said, oh, it's midnight on the same day. And the API goes, no, it's not. You're out. Go log in. So then it redirected. He did a soft redirect to a login page on a subdomain.
Oh.
So
wow.
Basically, but then
that's what all looked the same.
Yeah, that's why it all looked the same. But quite confusingly, that wasn't the page that it was telling people to go to because that was no indexed. However, they were loading the content in, so it was just random, and it was really kind of a very strange one, and probably not one you'd see very often.
So, how did you untangle that mess?
Basically, we managed to sort of have a look at the cache. I said, "Well, look at your rendered HTML," and they're like, "Oh, it's just login." Why is for this when they're doing a live test? Unfortunately, it didn't do it all the time in live test because the live test doesn't have that same problem with the timestamp, so they couldn't really do it in there. The big problem as well is they couldn't look at the rendered HTML for most of the URLs because they were duplicated, submitted, not set to canonical, at which point the URL inspector will not show you what they rendered. So that was a bit of thing. So basically it was getting good old cache, like you do cache colon in the search results. Okay. And you can see that the homepage showed this login page, and that's kind of, then, well, what processes do you have that will lead you to a login? And then follow it back from there. Wow.
That's a great story. So Mika Fishner-Kirchner, who was also on the podcast, I interviewed him at Tech SEO Boost just before COVID. Basically one of the last in-person things I ever did. He wants to know, do you have a big tech SEO pet peeve? So maybe this is a big mistake a lot of developers make, or a lot of sites make, or some kind of big issue that happens a lot. Any sort of pet peeve?
Pet peeve, yeah, it's kind of thing. I think it's stuffing an overabundance of tracking and pixels and things and GTag and then another analytics,
like Hotjar
Hotjar, and then another one, and then oh well, we've got this thing that tracks calls, and they'll just load down and down and down and down and down, and it builds up and up and up and up. But they'll stick them all in the head, all above all the important stuff, and it's all running away. There's iframes in there, and it seems and it's such a heavy thing. I understand truly you need to get metrics on what your users are doing and how people are interacting with the site, but it gets put on and then it gets forgotten about and it's left on, and then they'll get the latest greatest new shiny tool and then stick that on.
Right.
And it's just general sort of hygiene in that respect, and understanding that has impact on not only how your users do it, but then it certainly when you're doing things that are sticking iframes in your page, and it's this third party thing here that maybe you forgot about and you're not keeping your eye on. You've given them the keys to your website in a way. They can do kind of anything. They can do articles in some ways. Mostly these are reputable things, most things like Facebook, who aren't going to suddenly start doing stuff, but it's amazing the cruft that builds up. And then they wonder why things are beginning to get slow to index, slow to view. They're getting poor page speeds, poor core web vitals. And it's often it's just a case of every now and again, brush stuff off,
right.
Ask around who's actually using this, Even I think it's Martin Split once said, one of the things that he started to do is accidentally remove one for a while and see if anybody complains, which is a sure sign of whether it's been used or not.
Right. That's clever. Another question comes from, and I'm going to butcher some of these names, but Prapula Hada on Twitter. He wants to know, what's your best, in your opinion, what's the best free underrated tool or tools for tech SEO?
Yeah. I don't know if it's underrated or not, but Google Search Console is kind of the closest we have to a source of truth. and the actual search results and DevTools. Obviously, there's mine on my site.
That's right. I'll link to those.
Got to give that a push. Yep. Yeah. Anything Chris Johnson makes, he's deface.dev. He's got a great range of little free tools for doing things. And then there's the venerable technical SEO tools.com.
From Merkle, right?
Merkle. Yep. Yeah. And they've got ever so handy things like hreflang generator schema stuff and all kinds of useful little bits and bobs. Obviously, as well, if you're starting out and you just wanted to start a lot of things, Screaming Frog has a free level. Yep. Not great for a big site, but brilliant while you're getting to understand the tool and understand that nature of things. So there's plenty of free stuff out there if you look around.
Yeah, the plugin I like is called SEO Minion. It's just a browser plugin, but it's one of these plugins that gives you all the metadata, and I think it gives you like open graph tags. It has an hreflang checker, so that's another cool one.
Yeah.
So another question comes from a name that I'm definitely not going to pronounce correctly, but his Twitter is @LuJ60606. He wants to know, stick with me here. So if a page is blocked by robots.txt, but is in the sitemap and is indexed, can internal and external links pointing to the page pass link juice or ranking signals to that page? That's a great question. I'm definitely curious to hear what you think.
I mean, obviously, this is just what I think and what I've observed. But yeah, I think it can. I mean, an ideal example of that is kind of you do search on Google for Twitter card validator, you'll find it ranks well, and it's robot texted out. Yeah.
I've tweeted about that so many times over the years.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. It works well for them. It's bots. I can understand they don't want bots coming and using it to refresh the cache of your Twitter cards and stuff. So there's obviously some element of external linking and maybe internal linking passing some ranking value, which really is going to be page rank to some extent. I would imagine that's where it ends. It's not going to spread it any further. It reaches there. It's not crawled it. It doesn't know what that page links to. So the journey ends there.
Yeah, because when you think about it, if Google sees the URL, they don't necessarily need to see the contents of that page to give it any link quality.
It's always one of those things, because people often find that very confusing, why robots.txt pages sometimes index where can they return. Well, sometimes you can think it's like going to Buckingham Palace. You know the Queen's in there because everybody else says the Queen's in there, and the flags at the front says the Queen's in there. You don't know if she's in a coat of pajamas or what bedspread she's got because you're not allowed in to look, but you can say with some confidence that's where the Queen lives. And I think it's kind of that kind of situation, really.
So one more tech SEO related question. This comes from Ocean of Noise on Twitter. How would you expand? So if you're a content-based SEO, in your recommendation, Dave, how would you expand your skills more into tech SEO? What would be some good first steps to take?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, firstly, have a look through a couple of resources. The Google developer docs are massively improved this past couple of years. Mm-hmm. They've done some great work over there. And that's kind of organized. If you go to developers.google.com search, I think it's then docs or something, there's many at the top, and basically work your way through the lot. There'll be some content stuff in there as well. But there's a lot of the kind of technical aspects of it. A lot of it now is not written so dryly. A lot of it has more examples, or this is what you need to achieve. Mm-hmm. And certainly from the Google, that's the source. That's from the horse's mouth. Another great one that I've always found, if you're starting out and you want to know a little thing, is Moz's Guide. Moz's do Beginner's Guide to SEO. That's got a technical SEO section, which takes you through a lot of the concepts, I think, in a very easy to understand way without it battering it all. Then get a site of your own and play. Build something. It doesn't need to be anything important or to you, or you don't need to put that pressure on yourself that it's got to rank really well, but it can help you understand how things work and how they interact with search. You go, oh, well, that means it's not indexed, or that means it does. And you're not scared of breaking something because it's not a client site. You're not getting paid. You're not going to get yelled at if you break it. So that's a good thing. Other things is never feel bad asking questions to people, like on Twitter. There's no matter of fact, the only dumb questions are the ones that you don't ask, I think. The ones that people don't say. Sometimes people can get a little bit gatekeepy and a little bit grumpy at you. ignore those people. That they're telling on themselves. So ask, and then the other thing as well that I think, and I know it's set me up as well, as things like Search Central forums, Google Forms, hang out there, read the questions, because there's loads of different things come through there, and you can sort of see and learn from other people's experiences.
That's a great tip, and you gave me the perfect segue, so I appreciate that, because I want to talk about what you do, and I'm going to butcher the title, by the way, because I think it's product expert now, right? So what is your title with what you're doing with Google and Search Central?
Yeah, title may be a bit grand, but yeah, we used to be top contributors, and now we're product experts. Yeah. Basically, for Search Central, Google's a lot of support for things like that. There isn't official support as much. I mean, there's John Wheeler, who's amazing and stuff, but there's not really a one-to-one kind of support. You can't phone someone up, you can't email someone. So for a lot of the products, they have the community forums. And the idea of those is you go and you help, and it's peers, it's people like us who have sites or work in the SEO industry, or or whatever the product is you happen to be asking about. For us, it's grouped under Search Console, but we cover a lot of your sites in search, and are they getting indexed, ranking problems. So it's basically just going and volunteering some time, reading through, helping people out, and doing that.
How did you get involved with that? Were you first a community member, and then it went from there? Or?
Basically, yeah. Yeah, and I think nearly everyone there has got that same path and same story. Had a problem with the site, couldn't quite understand. It seemed a bit weird, and a few questions. Where can I ask? Oh, look, I have a forum. Asked, and then looked around. Thought, oh, I can answer a few of those, and kind of never left. So that's been a few years now. So yeah.
Do you get any special access or Google secrets through your product expert work? No.
Sadly not. I mean, it is something that's interesting. If you you contribute and you make it to a product expert, there are certain opportunities where you'll get to interact with Googlers. Sometimes you'll get to work on, get early access to things like beta products. So there's a new feature coming out on Search Console, for example. You'll get maybe heads up, and you'll get to try the new reports before, and get to even have you say a little bit, oh, this doesn't work and that does work and stuff. And that feels good. That's good. But yeah, there's certainly no, oh, we're going to make this ranking change, and this is what you need to put on, or this is what it's for. Right. That's very much public. There's no secret source, for that. The other part of it as well is if there is something that's wrong, and, like someone comes to you, my site's doing this in search, why? And at some point you can go, yeah, why? There's a path where it can be escalated, so we can pass that up the line. It'll go to the appropriate people in Google and maybe get fixed, or maybe we'll all get to learn a bit something, and we'll go, oh yeah, we should say about that, as to why that does that, or, and it can drive documentation, it can drive further learning, or sometimes it can drive the, oops, yeah, our bad, and, someone's day's made better because they fixed that little problem. Few and far between. It's most of the stuff that comes from there isn't like that. But every now and again it is. And
I think it's a good tip to actually just browse the forum, because researching for this interview, I hadn't gone there in a few years to browse around, and I'm like, wow, there's lots of really good information here. I mean, really like specific technical questions, and just like you said, just reading some of the answers, you might pick up on some nuances that you might not have known otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's democratic. It's open to all. Anyone can go in and start pitching in, I think that's the greatest thing as well. And I think that in some ways, the fact that it's not Google support is as directly is a good thing, because it means that you can be a little bit more honest. You don't have to be all corporatey and googly, and you can go, do you know what, mate? Your site's spam. Maybe a little bit nicer. I know that sounds kind of rude, but we do get that. But it's kind of a kindness to tell them it's not going to work, do something different, because why let them waste the time?
Right.
But, other times there are things that you can sympathize with, and you can say, well, maybe Google is doing this a little bit wrong. And I actually agree with you, but unfortunately, it's the way it is. Or, maybe you can mitigate it by doing this, or, you're a little bit free to speak. So, yeah.
In terms of working with developers, just want to chat for like a minute or two about this. So in an interview you had done a few years ago, you mentioned developers work in a culture of tickets. And I thought that was really interesting. And so can you just unpack that like a little bit and explain like, what does that mean exactly? And how, as SEOs, especially the technical SEO, doing an audit or something like, how can that help us just understanding that culture better work and communicate with developers?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, most tasks that a developer has done, maybe when it's somebody you're setting off coding something, you're very small, then fine, you'll just, I want to head there, and you'll plug away and you'll go there. But once something gets a bit more mature, it'll be a process of tickets. It can be, and by ticket, it means basically a short form someone will fill in with certain details. It'll go, this is the problem, or this is the feature that we want, or, this is a little bit of background and detail about it. And then usually an acceptance criteria, which basically means this is what a successful outcome would look like. Okay. And this is how we measure it. So if you can compartmentalize, put things down like that, and you've got, basically simple, well, say, for example, there was a site and the canonicals were all pointed to the homepage or something like that. You can say, right, well, we need this fixed, and the canonicals need to be the one URL. They need to be different, but specific for each page. You need to be self-referencing. And it's quite important. Give it some kind of importance, explain a little. It depends on who you're with, but sometimes they'll want a little bit of justification or backup, particularly if you're first working with things. But mostly developers don't. They just want, what's the problem? And what would the solution look like? And you say, well, I want this, and I want it to look like this. And then it's quite important, and maybe you will need to justify the importance level, and it's quite important because it's meaning this for the site. And then because you've got that, that's documented. They can work on it. They can put it in their queue. It could be assigned to somebody. Everybody can look at that and go, this hasn't been done yet. Why? And it could be because they've got more important things to do, Yeah. And you need to understand that you're part of an ecosystem. For you, it's vitally important. Them getting yelled at by the C-suite that we need to ship such feature by the end of Thursday, maybe it's not so important. But get everything, speaking to them in their language in tickets and, marking stuff down like that, just helps smooth things over a little bit, I think, and it helps you speak their language.
Yeah, the part of it that occurs to me that's challenging is actually getting a ticket created sometimes. Is what I've seen, especially if you're an outside consultant or you're just starting working with a company or something. Is there anything in your experience you've seen be helpful in terms of just getting those tickets created and getting them in the system and getting it prioritized, or at least let's start with in the system, like at all.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with clients where like 3 months into it, finally somebody shows up and goes, oh, we should create a ticket for that. And then all of a sudden something's done in a week that I've been asking for 3 months. Because magically a ticket is created all of a sudden.
A ticket got created. I think it's right at the beginning, understand how the organization works and who does what, who's responsible for what. Because very often with SEO, you might be talking to the marketing team or somebody who's not necessarily the product team, who's not necessarily on the dev or the DevOps side. So find out early on, look, who actually is responsible for making the changes and how does that work? How can I provide that? Because they might not know. They might not even think about that's what they need to do. They might get the approval and get all this funding for a big audit and then not even think about that part of it. So at that point, it's to try and make contact with whoever is, it could be on product, it could be in dev, whoever's kind of at least semi-responsible for it. And then talk to them, well, how can I best fit in with your needs? Because you need them on your side. You need them to understand that you're there to try and make the business, the whole life better. You're not there to make everything worse. And you can make some really powerful allies in the dev team. They can tell you where all the skeletons lie. They can tell you why things aren't moving and why things aren't. And quite often, because you can then take that back in a different way, it can get through to the C-suite. It can get through to the people holding the purse strings in ways that maybe the dev team can't. So it's kind of have their back. I mean, occasionally you'll come across some, just like anyone, someone will just try and block everything and just awful people, but mostly they're not. And the thing is to understand that you're all trying to go in the same direction. You're trying to make a product, a site overall better, and just try and steer it that way and talk to them that way. I understand that if they tell you, there's no chance we're going to get those changes done for so-and-so. Well, that's important for you to know up front before you start suggesting loads of micro optimizations and little bits and bobs, and then hit them with that. And they'll see this big, huge load of stuff that probably won't make that much difference. It's just not going to get done.
Yeah.
And then, that's no good for anyone.
So I had one last fun question from Eamon Lukil. I think that's how you say his name. He's LOUKILAYMEN on Twitter. His question was, what's a day in the life of Dave? But I'd like to just pivot that a little bit to like, what's your kind of workflow, right? So when I do more auditing type work for clients, what I'll typically do is go off, take a week or two, do an initial task list, put them in a spreadsheet, and want to get on phone calls with that client. I mean, that's basically my work. What's your sort of approach to auditing and tech SEO workflow?
Yeah, it's kind of very similar, actually. I think the first thing you've got to have a chat first. You've got to get to know the people a little bit up front, find out. Sometimes it's good to know where we're heading. Why have they talked to you? What is the problem? Sometimes you'll get clients who want an audit. Oh, great. Why?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is, they just want an audit. They just want to happen to get a baseline of where they are. They're always the worst. They're always kind of the trickiest because it's then so broad that you don't really know where you're heading with it sometimes.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the first thing is chat with them, find out what are the pain points, what are the problems that we're looking into, and then try and get as much access as you can, explain what you're going to need, the tools that you'll need from them to do the job. So things like access to the Search Console, server logs if you can get them, and then spend some time looking around in those. Like you say, have a chat, see what the problems that pop out to you are, and then have a look around the site itself, because so many times you can hyper focus on numbers and metrics and little bits and bobs and sometimes the obvious is right in your face when you actually just go and use the site and you just approach it and look at it.
Right.
So always give it that quick human once over. At that point, like you say, get a call. And I think it's useful at that point with maybe a little summary of I've got a few things that I'd like to talk to you about. And often you might need to get clarification on something because you might say, well, all these pages are no indexed. Why? And then, you'll make a big recommendation to do that. And they go, can't do that, regulatory reasons, or, other business reasons, or, can't do that in this territory or something. So at that point, a bit of a chat stops everybody's time being wasted. And then from there, you can then create more of a tailored report in whatever format, get some tickets done. I tend to prefer, it depends on who the client is. Sometimes they want the big 60-page document of everything. Not sure how much use those always are, rather than the bulleted point list of this needs doing because of so-and-so. Here's some supporting information. Here's what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And run through the issues, which tends to be a lot more actionable. Things tend to happen more than, a great big hefty tome that slaps on someone's desk as they printed it out.
Yeah.
Never gets read because it's boring.
Yeah. I stopped doing those 60-page audits years ago, A, because I'm not a fan of typing a whole lot, and B, because I found that the clients wouldn't use them really. And so that's when I started putting everything in spreadsheets, just each line item is a task with a priority and maybe some documentation or whatever. And that actually is what causes clients to actually do what I'm telling them to do. So,
yeah, because it's manageable.
Yeah.
It's something you can actually, it's not like being hit with a brick of it. It's spoon feeding them and they can do a bit at a time if they need to, so.
Yeah. So Dave, it's been fantastic having you on episode 124 of Experts in the Wire. So just before we leave everyone and sign off for the day, where are all the places people can find you? Your website, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever you want to send people to, now is the opportunity.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Dave W. Smart. You can find me at tamethebots.com. A few bits of blogs on there. Or you can maybe find me hanging around the Google search forums.
There you go. Any speaking coming up?
Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Any speaking coming up?
Nothing particularly planned at the minute now, so we'll see.
Awesome. All right, Dave. Well, thanks again, and we'll see everyone or talk to everyone next time.